a lot of education, having an experience in another country. Now, as I said, I grew with the problems of Darfur because I was, 11 years when I became chief. I was born in a village. My father was a chief then. But a chief's son does not necessarily mean that he is somebody that one will envisage is living a luxurious life. I was just living a simple life in the village. I worked as a shepherd boy, going with the cows, with the goats, to guard them from wild animals and to find grazing for them. And this was just which every young man in the village did, and I did that. I lived in my family and in Darfur. Both men and women worked very hard, either as farmers, traditional farmers, or looking after their herds. And my mother was one of them. She had her own farm. She used to grow sorghum. She used to grow onions. She used to grow everything that were needed by a household. So I knew how the ordinary person in Darfur lived from my own childhood and my own experience, from which then I developed that impetus and the desire that I was privileged, in spite of my humble background in the village, that I managed to find my way into education up to the University of Khartoum level. And in my time, strangely enough, in the University of Khartoum, there were only 5 people from Darfur. Only 5. In the whole university, it was over 3,000 or 5,000 people. We were only 5. So I was privileged to be there as one of the privileged rural people to come to a university level. When I finished that, I worked as a civil servant, which also gave me another experience. And then my boss, who was a Dutchman, he trained me and then decided that I should go abroad and study further and specialize in economics. So he sent me to the United Kingdom in 1959. And then I went to the university in Leicester and did another degree in economics, and then specialized in applied economics, or econometrics as they call it. I came back to the Sudan as a director of statistics and at the same time as advisor in the Ministry of Planning and Development. We made the first 10-year economic development plan of the Sudan. Then we had a military regime of General Aboud, and there was an upheaval in the Sudan against the military regime, and it succeeded. General Aboud resigned, and democratic life came back. So the people in Darfur asked me that, look, you are an educated person and you are one of us. We want you to stand for elections as a member of parliament. And I said, well, what is the guarantee? I said, well, look, you stay here and we will bring you. And actually they managed to elect me to the Sudanese parliament in 1965 as an independent candidate. Now, I went as an independent candidate because I was there when Sudan became independent in 1965, 50, 56, and 60. And I have seen the structure of Sudanese politics, that our democratic system was not much different from the military regime because it was based on religious sectarianism. We had 2 main parties, and they derived their power from the religious leadership of the Sudanese religious sects. And the hierarchy in the party was dependent on the families that were a religious head. And I was saying that this is not the right way of doing democracy because, again, there's dictatorship. People are not practicing their democratic right through the normal way as it should be, that everybody is free and everybody should know that you elect a government to serve you, not to serve the government. And you elect a leader to serve you, not to be subservient to the leader. But the religious leaders they were religious leaders, and everybody followed that religious sect, and therefore they were obliged to vote for the party, whether it did anything for them or it didn't. So I was against that, and I said I am not going to join any political party. I will go as an independent candidate, so I'll be free to say what I want and to serve the people who elect me rather than serving a religious leader, being after I affiliate myself with one of them. So you can say that when I entered the Sudanese politics, I entered with a completely new vision, that I am there to serve the people, not the people to be subservient to me. And also to do something about the people who gave me the honor to go to Parliament, to see to it that they benefit from my presence there in improving their life and livelihood. So that is how I went into Sudanese politics, and that's how I got involved in the welfare of the people rather than on the welfare of myself. Now, in the Sudan, the situation was that we had a government which was over-centralized. Sudan is one of the largest countries in Africa, and it is the biggest in size. The second is Algeria, and the third is Nigeria, and it's the 9th largest country in territory, in area. Sudan, 9th in the whole world. After Brazil, Sudan is in the 9th largest country in size. And having studied political science at the University of Khartoum first, I came to know that usually countries which are large in size, they adopt a system of government which is based on decentralization, because the country is so big that central planning will not work because it's so big. Countries also where there's diversity of culture and ethnicity may necessarily adopt a system of government that will handle such a situation. And Sudan also, being a country which is multi-ethnic and which is multi-religious, you cannot have a centralized government with one vision. And in fact, this is one of the problems we are suffering from today, because in the first place we had our independence, in which the political parties were sectarian, and they divided the Sudan into two. One religious sect, which was the Umma party, was controlling the western Sudan, Kordofan and Darfur, which in population, they have half the population of the Sudan. The other party, which was the National Democratic Party now, it was called the National Unionist Party, had also a religious sect at the head of it, and it was mainly in the northern part of Sudan, bordering Egypt, until the frontiers of Kordofan, the south, and Darfur. So the people generally, when there is a democratic system and there are elections, they are either Umma party, because they are religious followers of the Umma party, who are called Ansars. Ansars means followers, or National Democratic Party, which is following of the other religious sect. And the level of education not being so great for many MPs to understand that when they go there, they are going to represent the people who elect them. They thought that they are going to represent the leaders of the political parties. The leaders of the political parties also had power because they had money. And therefore, anybody who wanted to be elected has to be financially supported by them and approved by them, so that the people can then use the religious influence with the masses of the people to elect, this is our man. So they came to parliament as the representatives of the religious leaders rather than the representatives of the people who elected them. And then there was jealousies between the two parties, because each religious leader felt that this is my competitor, that religious leader, and therefore I should be the number one. But neither of them got enough majority to rule by himself or through his party. So they were forced to have a coalition government between two parties. Within that two party, they were jealous of each other. They were antagonizing each other. They will form a government of what they may call it national unity or call it any name. But in fact, within that party, they are antagonizing each other. So most of the time, they spend it in antagonizing each other, in canceling each other, rather than doing positive things for the people. And then the military, which was the only organized part of the community, will find that I think the people are frustrated and they are fed up with seeing these people whom they elected doing nothing for them. So they make a military coup and take over. And when they take the military coup, they were not prepared to rule a country. They didn't have a clear plan. All they had is brute force and power. So, but they feel that they have to do something. So anything they do is done to please people, whether it is feasible or not. And there's nobody to criticize it. So they opted for what the economists call white elephants, big projects, so that at the anniversary of the revolution, there will be a big fanfare to show the achievement. And the achievement could be a big dam or a big scheme or something that people can see physically what it is. But in fact, it may not be feasible or so. So what happened out of all this, that the people in the peripheries started to feel that they don't see any change, whether it's under the democratic elected government or a military government. So they started, the young elites who got educated, to form their own organizations. And in 1964, I formed an organization called the Darfur Development Front, because we felt that Darfur was neglected since the colonial period. And the reason was simple, that Darfur was the last region in the Sudan to join the Sudan as it is. It was an independent kingdom till 1916. And it was annexed by force by the British to the rest of the Sudan. But because they fought the British, and the British defeated the last Sultan, it was an Anglo-Egyptian government, and therefore they felt that these people in Darfur, they are rebels, and we should treat them as rebels, and we don't want to give them any chance to rise up again. So they never did any project of a development nature in Darfur. They just ruled it with an iron fist. And therefore, in Darfur, the people lacked services, they lacked development, and many of them had to go to the northern part of Sudan, to central Sudan, where there were development projects to provide cheap labor, because there were no projects. This, of course, increased the resentment, and in the end, the result of that, we felt it, and we, the elites of Darfur, created what we call the Darfur Development Front. And this was for all the people in Darfur, irrespective of their political affiliation, irrespective of their ethnic origin or tribal origin. Which is, today, strangely enough, this government is using ethnicity in a different way, as an instrument of divide or rule, and divide and rule, using this ethnicity itself for the people of Darfur to fight each other, rather than fighting for their rights against the government, because the grievance is with the government, not with each other, because they themselves are all underdeveloped. They are all of them poor. All of them need services, need development, need everything. Whether they are people who are looking after their animals, we're called pastoralists, or whether they are traditional agricultural farmers, because both of them have not been touched by modernity. Those who are farmers they used the simple implement that the ancestors used to cultivate, which was very hard work. Those who are pastoralists, they are roaming around. Wherever there is grazing for their animals, they go. Wherever there is water, they go. They haven't got the opportunity of educating their children. They haven't got the opportunity of getting medical services, just as much as the farmers living in villages are living. So that's why we started Darfur Development Front for all the people of Darfur, irrespective of their ethnic or tribal or religious origin. It happened that also the people in the rest of the Sudan, in the peripheries, the east, the Bija, and the south, and the Nuba Mountain started movement simultaneously in 1964. The Nuba started the Nuba Solidarity Movement, led by a priest called Philip Gabush. He died about 3 years ago. And the people in the south started a movement called Sudan African National Union by a southerner Dinka, also called William Deng, who died also. And then the Bija started a movement also in the east called the Bija Congress. And all of us, Darfur Development Front, the Bija Congress, and the Nuba, came together and said, well, look, we should consolidate our efforts because our situation is the same. We are all underdeveloped. And then see how we can fight this underdevelopment together rather than each doing it by itself. So we formed an organization called New Forces Congress. And we called ourselves New Forces. This, of course, later on developed when the SPLA started. And they called it the New Sudan. So the idea of New Sudan was there since 1964 as New Forces Congress, bringing all the peripheral people to work together for their welfare vis-a-vis the central government in Khartoum. So that is where the impetus for these demands, which later developed, and because nobody was listening in Khartoum, the political parties were involved in internal wrangling, and the military people, they were ruling by sheer force. They couldn't care about what people thought. So things developed later on that these movements, which were only movements asking for justice and equality, became military. So we had the Sudan Liberation Movement in Darfur, and we have the GEM in Darfur, and I started a movement called Darfur, not Darfur Development Front, but Sudan Federal Democratic Alliance. And I called it Alliance because I wanted still the alliance we created with the peripheries, which was called New Forces Congress, will continue. Because the more we are together, the better opportunity we have to wrest our rights from the central government. There is a long history about the development of this dissension in the peripheries versus the central government, and it is a situation that exists up to now. So today in Darfur you have some people like myself. I formed my movement, which is Sudan Federal Democratic Alliance, on a clear vision, and it was for the whole Sudan, not for Darfur. If the Sudan as a whole is to remain united, irrespective of the ethnical diversity and religious diversity, first of all, we must accept our reality, that we are multi-ethnic. And the ethnicity is now based on people of Arab origin and of non-Arab origin. They're all Sudanese. And they've been living together since the colonial period. Why don't they live together now? And if there are grievances, they are not caused by either of them. Their grievances coming from the central government, who had the power and who had the ability to be fair and just to everybody in the country. So instead of the people in the peripheries fighting against each other, they should bring all their efforts together to fight against the central government, whatever nature it is, whether it's military or civilian, asking for justice rather than going along. Before, when the political parties themselves were overthrown by the military and they wanted to gain their power back, and the peripheral people who were complaining from marginalization, they call it, they came together and formed another alliance called the National Democratic Alliance. And this was in Asmara in Eritrea, and the Eritrean government gave us sanctuary. And then when the military government of President Bashir came and he said that, look, I came by political force and military force. Anybody who wants his right has to come and face me militarily. So we decided in the National Democratic Alliance that we also have followers, so we should bring our followers who are able to take arms to counter this government which is taking arms. So we created armed groups, and the SPLA was with us. It was the first and the strongest military faction of the NDA, the political parties and us also. We came together with them and formed this alliance for a new democratic government to be brought about in the Sudan. And we called it new in the sense that in the old Sudan, all the political parties, plus anybody who ruled, whether he was military or otherwise, identified the Sudan as an Arab and Islamic state, which was not true, because in the Sudan we had people who were not Arabs, and we had people who were not Muslims. We had Christians, we had Muslims, yes, we had Jews in the Sudan. There is a synagogue still there, and there are people who are animists. They have not entered any of these religions of the book, as they call them.